He was born in the cold wilderness of Kentucky on February 12, 1809, a child no one expected the world to remember. A boy who had nothing, no wealth, no powerful family, not even a proper school to hold his dreams. And yet that boy would grow into a man who carried a broken nation on his shoulders and paid for its survival with his life. This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, the man who rose from a dirt-floored cabin to save the United States from tearing itself apart. A story of grief, courage, loneliness, and a heart that never stopped fighting for justice, even when the world tried to silence him. Abraham's childhood was shaped by hardship long before he learned to walk. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, lived a life of backbreaking work. Their cabin was small, dark, and constantly under threat from the wilderness that surrounded them. When Abraham was just a boy, he watched his father struggle to provide food, clothing, anything that could make life a little easier. But there were days when there was no comfort, only the long stretch of land, and the reality that they were among the poorest families in Kentucky. He grew up mostly barefoot, wearing clothes patched so many times that the original fabric was hardly visible. But inside this quiet, awkward boy was a hunger not for food, though they often lacked that too, but for knowledge. Abraham would walk miles to borrow a single book. He'd sit under trees in fields by the dim light of a fire, copying every word he read because he knew books were the one escape from a life that had offered him so little. While other boys played, Abraham read anything he could find: Aesop's fables, the Bible, Robinson Crusoe stories, that shaped his moral compass and carved in him a belief that every human being deserved dignity. But fate had more pain waiting for him. When he was only 9 years old, tragedy darkened his world. His mother, Nancy, became sick with milk sickness, a mysterious illness that swept through the countryside. Abraham watched helplessly as the woman who had comforted him through hunger, storms, and fear took her last breath. She died slowly, painfully, and the memory of her suffering carved a scar deep inside the boy who adored her. They buried her on a small hill, no coffin, no grand farewell, just a crude wooden marker standing over the woman who had given Abraham his gentleness and moral strength. Her death changed him, hardening parts of his heart while illuminating others. For months, Abraham barely spoke. But when his father remarried, bringing Sarah Bush Johnston into their humble home, Abraham found something he desperately needed: kindness. Sarah recognized the intelligence in the lanky, quiet boy and encouraged his learning. She treated him as her own, giving him something he had almost forgotten: motherly warmth. That support, small as it may seem, became the foundation for Abraham's inner resolve. As he grew into a teenager, Abraham became known for two things: his remarkable height and his unbearable sadness. He shot up to more than 6 feet tall, towering over everyone. His arms were long, his hands massive, his walk clumsy. People joked about his appearance, calling him awkward, calling him strange. But they also noticed his strength, the way he could split logs faster than any man in the county. They hired him for hard labor, and Abraham delivered with quiet determination. Yet behind the physical power lay a heart that felt everything deeply. He wrote poetry about pain, loneliness, and death, signs of the darkness that already followed him. Eventually, Abraham left home, carving his life through jobs that barely paid enough for shelter. He became a store clerk, a postmaster, a rail splitter, anything that kept him afloat. But it was his voice, soft, resonant, honest, that set him apart. People noticed that when Abraham spoke, he spoke with clarity and a strange, magnetic sincerity. He didn't shout. He didn't pretend. He simply told the truth, and people listened. This talent launched him into politics. He became a state legislator in Illinois, earning the nickname Honest Abe. He wasn't flashy or wealthy. He didn't dress sharply or mingle with society's upper class. But he had something that made strangers trust him instantly: a moral backbone like iron, rooted in the hardships of his youth. Yet, his personal life was far from steady. Before he met Mary Todd, Lincoln fell deeply in love with Anne Rutledge, a delicate, kind woman who saw past his rough edges. She became the gentle light in his life. But sickness took her too. and died suddenly, and Abraham plunged into a grief so dark his friends feared he might not recover. That sadness followed him throughout his life, often pushing him into moments of deep emotional collapse. Mary Todd eventually became his partner, brilliant, educated, fiery. She believed Abraham was destined for greatness even when he didn't believe it himself. Their marriage was turbulent, full of love but also arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional storms. Still, she stayed by his side as he climbed the political ladder, pushing him forward when he doubted himself. Lincoln's rise to the presidency was anything but easy. He lost elections repeatedly. He received public insults for his looks, his intelligence, even his voice. Newspapers mocked him as a simpleton. Politicians dismissed him. But Abraham had something his enemies didn't: relentless willpower. Every failure made him stronger. Every loss sharpened his focus. Then came the moment that changed everything. By 1860, America was tearing apart. Slavery had divided the country into two hostile worlds. The South demanded its preservation. The North demanded limits. Violence was rising. States were threatening to break away. In the midst of this chaos, Abraham Lincoln, this humble, self-taught liar, was elected President of the United States. The moment he won, the storm hit. Southern states began seceding, forming the Confederacy. Lincoln hadn't even taken the oath yet, and the nation was already crumbling. He was thrust into the center of the greatest crisis in American history, a crisis that would define him, break him, and ultimately immortalize him. When he took office in March 1861, Abraham stood before a divided nation begging for unity. He spoke softly, pleading with the South. "We are not enemies, but friends." But the message came too late. The Civil War began a month later with the attack on Fort Sumter. Lincoln entered the White House with no military experience, yet he was now commander-in-chief of a war that risked destroying the country. His days became endless cycles of military reports, tragic news from the battlefield, and decisions that crushed him emotionally. The weight of the war aged him rapidly, his hair gray, his face gaunt, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Yet Lincoln never surrendered. He led with compassion, strategy, and a deep moral purpose. He saw slavery not just as a political issue, but as a cancer eating the soul of America. He knew the war wasn't just about preserving the Union. It was about reshaping the nation's destiny. In 1862, after countless battlefield failures, Lincoln took a step that stunned the world. He wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, a declaration that all enslaved people in the Confederacy were free. It was bold, risky, and revolutionary. His own advisors warned him not to sign it. Half the nation hated him. The other half doubted him. But Lincoln signed anyway, believing that justice was worth every political consequence. The war raged on. Thousands died every week. Mothers wept for sons who would never return. Cities burned. Families broke. Lincoln visited hospitals, walking among wounded soldiers, speaking softly, listening, offering comfort. They loved him. They saw not a president, but a father figure carrying the grief of the entire nation. Then came the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. After the Union victory, Lincoln delivered a speech so short people barely noticed it at first. But his Gettysburg address would become one of the most powerful speeches in history. In just a few words, he reminded America why the war mattered: freedom, equality, and a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. Despite victories, Lincoln's life at home crumbled. Mary Todd suffered emotional breakdowns from the loss of their son Willie, who died in the White House. Lincoln himself wept in silence, blaming himself for everything: his family's pain, the nation's suffering, the endless death. But he pressed on, because he believed the nation's survival mattered more than his own peace. By 1864, the war was turning in the Union's favor. Lincoln won re-election, something he didn't expect. In truth, he thought he would lose. He even prepared a letter accepting defeat. But the people chose him again, trusting him to finish the job. And he did. On April 9, 1865, the Confederacy surrendered. The war was over. Lincoln had saved the Union. He had ended slavery in the United States. He had done what no president before him dared to try. But destiny was waiting for him with one final tragedy. Just 5 days after the war ended, Lincoln went to Ford's Theater for a night of relief after 4 years of relentless suffering. As he sat beside Mary watching the play, a man slipped behind him, John Wilkes Booth, an actor consumed by hatred for Lincoln. Just after 10 p.m., Booth raised a pistol, aimed it at the back of Lincoln's head, and fired. The shot echoed like thunder across the nation. Lincoln was rushed across the street to a small boarding house. Doctors worked desperately, but the wound was fatal. Throughout the night, he lay unconscious, surrounded by his grieving officials, soldiers, and friends. At 7:22 am on April 15th, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath. The room fell silent. One general whispered, "Now he belongs to the ages." The nation he saved mourned like never before. Millions lined the streets as his body traveled by train back to Illinois. Mothers lifted their children so they could see the man who had preserved their future. Veterans removed their hats and wept openly. Former slaves knelt and thanked the man who had fought for their freedom. Abraham Lincoln began his life with nothing, no promise, no comfort, no power. But he ended it as one of the greatest leaders in human history, a man who carried a broken nation through its darkest hours, guided not by ambition, but by a simple belief that all people deserve a chance, just as he once did. His story is a reminder that greatness is not born, it is forged through hardship, compassion, and the courage to do what's right even when the world stands against you. Lincoln did not live to enjoy the peace he created, but he left behind a nation forever changed, a legacy that lives in every corner of America.